right, I see. I'm going to say that the majority of folks who've joined are connecting to their audio. It's great to see so many folks here tonight. Good evening. My name is Dalia Awwad. I'll be facilitating tonight's Arms Embargo Now webinar. Before we begin, I just want to quickly touch base on a couple of housekeeping items. So the first is that we're recording tonight's webinar, and we're going to be emailing the webinar to everybody, and we encourage you to share it with folks in your circle, so friends, family, what have you, who maybe wanted to attend tonight but weren't able to. Also, the automated Zoom captioning has been turned on. If that's something that you want to have access to, you're able to do that through the caption feature at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to see that. And we won't be taking questions via raised hands, but the chat feature is something that you're able to access. So yeah, so those are just some of the pieces. So we have several speakers lined up tonight. You're going to be hearing from organizers, union representatives, healthcare providers, and student organizers, all of whom have been organizing and mobilizing in the last almost 8 months to see Canada end its complicity in the genocide in Gaza. All of the folks here have come together in demanding that Canada impose an arms embargo on Israel. I'm a Palestinian organizer based in Toronto, and I know folks are joining us from coast to coast, and it's important for us to begin by saying that so-called Canada is situated on stolen land, that the settler colonial state of Canada was founded on an active and continuous genocide against the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island that has been ongoing for centuries. The complicity with the genocide of Palestinians is not surprising. It's in line with settler colonial states propping each other up and profiting off the genocides of Indigenous populations. We understand that the government is not the moral compass in any way, but the demand for morality and justice comes from the masses of the people on Turtle Island. In the last 8 months, we've all seen Israel carry out a genocidal campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza. We've seen the murder of more than 40,000 people, the injury of more than 100,000, countless missing, and more than 1.7 million people repeatedly internally displaced. Journalists, healthcare providers, parents, and children alike have all been targeted and deliberately killed by the Israeli war machine. There have been countless war crimes committed with the use of weapons sent from Western countries like Canada. The government of Canada approved $28.5 million worth of weapon exports since October 2023 alone, which was a record high that has not been seen in more than a decade. When the International Court of Justice ruled that there was a plausible case for genocide in Gaza, Canada did nothing. Later, when the international community demanded that Canada halt its arms trade with Israel and impose an arms embargo, the government decided to continue to profit off of the genocide of Palestinians. In March, a motion was passed in Parliament that stated that Canada would, quote, seize the further authorization and transfer of arms exports to Israel to ensure compliance with Canada's arms exports regime, end quote. And this was a watered down version of the initial motion that was put forward. The initial motion was saying that Canada would, quote, suspend all trade of military goods and technologies with Israel, end quote. So the motion was voted in as a result of organizing that has been taking place and the pressure that the government had felt. And it is a first step in achieving an arms embargo, but it is not an arms embargo. So, however, as of now, Melanie Joly has not formalized the cessation of arms export authorizations. And we also know that, suspending future exports of authorizations and transfers is not going far enough, particularly given the gravity and the scale of human rights violations that are taking place in Gaza. For the last 8 months, people have done everything in their power to see an arms embargo put into effect. They have held mass mobilizations, sit-ins, national days of action. They have called their MPs, emailed them, gone to their offices, demanded meetings, held sit-ins, protested. People have hosted town halls, vigils, and die-ins. They've held weapon pickets at weapons companies that are producing weapons or components of weapons that are then used by the Israeli war machine. People have even attempted to stop the flow of weapons themselves at ports and railways. Unions have called on the federal government to put an embargo into effect, and students have set up encampments demanding an end to investments in all companies complicit in the ongoing genocide of Palestinians. And so the Arms Embargo Now campaign comes as a result of this tireless organizing that we've seen to stop the arms trade. This campaign brought together more than 400 organizations, from national labor unions to grassroots organizations to religious organizations. Collectively, they are representing many millions of people across the country, and they're all united for an arms embargo. In the past couple of weeks, we've been pushing members of parliament to sign on. So far, 38 members of parliament have done so, 22 NDP MPs, 14 Liberal MPs, and 2 Green MPs. I think the last 8 months have shown us that an arms embargo demand is winnable. Not only does the demand have the support of masses of people, it has also the support of really large organizations that are wide-ranging and represent many millions of people. And we need to keep pushing and employing the diversity of tactics we have in our arsenal to make the government put an arms embargo into effect immediately. This is something that Melanie Joly can sign into effect any moment, but she'll only do so if the pressure is something that she cannot avoid. And so our speakers tonight will touch on a number of topics. They'll speak about the convoluted parts of the arms trade. They'll make connections to the student movement. They'll talk about connections of an arms embargo to the Palestine organizing more broadly. They'll speak about neighborhood organizing. They'll speak about the role of MPs and members of parliament in all of this. But if we had to pick one thing that we wanted you to take away from this evening, it's that we want you to leave here feeling motivated and encouraged to take action. We want you to get involved. We want you to get organized around this demand, around demanding an arms embargo, because not only is it winnable, but in the face of this immense destruction and ongoing genocide, the government, in fact, has a responsibility as a signatory of the Genocide Convention to impose an arms embargo. And together we can make this demand a reality. So with that, I'll introduce our first speaker for the evening. Rachel is the Canada organizer for World Beyond War, a global grassroots organization and network working to abolish war and the military-industrial complex. World Beyond War is one of the organizations to initiate the Arms Embargo Now campaign. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dalia, and thank you to the over 300 people who are joining live tonight and taking the time on a Monday evening to do this with us. This is a big deal, and I'm really appreciative to be here with all of you tonight. So I'll take just a few minutes to lay out some important context for this campaign and explain a little bit about what the Canada-Israel arms trade actually looks like, a bit more about what we have managed to force the government, kicking, screaming the entire way, to do about it so far, and what still has to happen to actually achieve an arms embargo. But first, World Beyond War recently put out a video that I'm going to start by playing now because it illustrates a lot of these points better than me just kind of saying them to you. So I'll share that with you right now.
Since Israel's latest assault on Gaza began in October, Palestine Solidarity organizers have zeroed in on Canada's arms trade with Israel as a key site of struggle. More than 50 companies have been identified across the country that manufacture weapons, components, and military technology for export to Israel. When confronted about this complicity, government officials misled the public.
And we have not emitted any new export permits since October 7th.
And we have sent, since October 7th, non-lethal equipment, including night vision goggles and protective gears. And that was through Canadian companies.
Canadian companies produce vital parts of the fighter jets, warships, drones, and attack helicopters that are decimating Gaza right now. In the span of 2 months, Canada approved more arms export permits for Israel than they had in any year for the past 3 decades. At the same time, Canada has been signing new contracts to purchase weapons and military equipment from Israel, directly funding Israel's war machine.
We want justice, you say how? We want justice, you say how? End the occupation now!
Communities across Canada have written, phoned, and petitioned our MPs.
Palestine will be free!
We have held teach-ins, community meetings, and town halls. We have flyered, marched, picketed, and rallied at every government office you can name.
We call on Mayor Olivia Chow to be an advocate for a two-way arms embargo on Israel.
This collective power forced the Trudeau government to promise to end the approval of new military export permits. But they have yet to formalize this policy or stop the flow of arms that they had already approved. A full arms embargo will stop the flow of all military goods, both to and from Israel. It will close the loophole that allows military goods to reach Israel untracked and unreported via the U.S., and it will stop the funneling of our tax dollars into Israel's military industry.
Not another nickel, not another dime. No more arms for genocide.
Movement pressure is working, but the government of Canada has refused to act decisively to save Palestinian lives and impose a full arms embargo on Israel. We've had no choice but to escalate. People of conscience from coast to coast are taking action to shut down ports, rails, highways, and weapons factories.
All three Harris! Shut it down! We will not let this go. Not yet.
Occupying their university campuses, disrupting the arteries of the economy, and forcing our government's hand to stop the flow of weapons, money, and legitimacy to the Israeli war machine. Let's do this.
So yeah, that's kind of a really quick overview of some things that I'll dig into more depth. But first, I maybe will just say that, so while this webinar, this gathering tonight is largely focused on this big joint multi-sector push to get MPs to sign on to the call for an arms embargo, because that is a mechanism to get the Liberal government to actually implement one, I do also right at this moment want to give a shout out just to the many thousands of people across the country who, as we've just seen, as Dalia mentioned, are taking all sorts of other actions to push for this. And I specifically want to say, like, in just the last couple days, there was an incredible rail blockade in Vancouver that met with terrible police brutality and a number of arrests. There was a large protest that blocked access to Canada's biggest weapons show in Ottawa that also saw many peace activists attacked by police and arrested. And of course, as we'll talk about later tonight, there are these incredible student encampments that have been just such incredibly powerful mobilizations across the country. And I can't wait to hear from some of their organizers later. So some of the advocacy that we're digging into more tonight is, of course, happening in this broader context of mobilizing across Turtle Island and really around the world. These are not separate things that are happening. These are all things that are happening in concert at the same time, that are all putting an enormous amount of pressure on this government to end its complicity in the violence. So yeah, I will just take just a couple more minutes now to explain some of the key points a bit further. As you saw briefly in this video, literally in every part of this country, there are hundreds of companies that are currently engaged in making primarily weapons components that are exported to be used in Israeli military weapons systems. It would take a very long time for me to get into all of it, but just for a local example, for us here in Toronto, there's a factory, just as one example, that makes military circuit boards that are exported to one of Israel's largest military companies, Elbit Systems, and they use those circuit boards in their laser guidance kit, which change sort of general multi-purpose bombs into precision munitions. And these circuit boards are also used in F-15 and F-16 fighter jets, some of the main warplanes that the Israeli military has been using for its air assaults on Gaza. So when you see figures about Canadian arms exports to Israel, it refers to exports like these ones that go directly from Canadian companies and are exported to Israel. And all of these have to have permits that are approved by the Canadian government, because that's how military exports work. They approve the permits, and then the companies are able to ship them overseas. Specifically, Global Affairs Canada has to approve those contracts. And as Dalia mentioned, Canada has approved a record-breaking amount of those military export permits to sell weapons directly to Israel, and that in just the first 3 months of their genocide. But then there's a much larger number of exports that are not even tracked by the Canadian government, that you will not see dollar figures about, because they go not directly to Israel, they go via the US on the way. So the Canadian government does not count them. Often, for example, a really big example of those are weapons components for the F-35, which is the most advanced fighter jet. If you're hearing these horrific stories of 2,000-pound bombs that are falling on Gaza, that's the F-35, Lockheed Martin's newest fighter jet. And literally hundreds of places across the country, factories are producing components for the F-35 that are shipped down to Texas and then shipped overseas to Israel. Those are not even counted right now in terms of Canada's weapons trade with Israel. So that is a little bit about how Canada is arming Israel's genocide through these exports, really producing vital parts of the warships, of the drones, of the attack helicopters, of all of the horrific weapon systems that are decimating Gaza right now. That's the exports. But what is not talked about as much is the imports, because Canada is also funding Israel's war machine by being a weapons customer, by importing just a huge amount of weaponry from Israeli weapons companies to be used by the Canadian military. So as we saw just really briefly in this video, in December, when Israel had already massacred over 20,000 Palestinians, the Canadian military announced a brand new deal with Israeli state-owned weapons company, Rafael, to purchase their Spike missiles. So these are missiles that the Israeli military is currently using on Gaza, that they are advertising as battle-tested on Palestinians, and that the Canadian government has now decided to purchase from Israel. This is really important because the Israeli government has said that these weapon sales are how they are funding their current genocide. This is how they are paying for their hugely expensive military operations, is by ramping up their weapon sales to countries like Canada. So that's why it's really important that when we're talking about an arms embargo, we're talking about the flow of weapons to and from Israel, not just the weapons we're selling to Israel, but also what we're buying for them, because that's directly funding the exact same horrific project. So after months of really intense mobilizing across the country, many thousands of people, as we have seen, out on the streets every single week doing all of the different things available to them, the government was feeling the pressure, started saying things like, oh, we're only shipping non-lethal weapons. I'm not even going to get into that, because what they're talking about are these same circuit boards that I mentioned. They're talking about components of missiles, but they're trying to label them non-lethal to, I don't know, to fool us. I don't think anyone has been fooled by that. If it's part of a fighter jet missile system, this is not non-lethal. And then in March, due to overwhelming pressure from all of you, from many millions of people across the country, they announced that they would be no longer approving any new permits to export weapons to Israel. So I do want to first say that's a really big deal. There's zero chance the Canadian government would have done that without the enormous pressure that they were feeling from all of us. And the headlines over the following week in Israel were extreme. Like, they were extremely upset that Canada was not going to be approving further weapons permits. And then these headlines traveled all over the world. Other countries took deep inspiration from this. So this was a big win. However, I want to be clear about what it was. They committed to not approving new permits to export weapons to Israel, but what they didn't do was cancel the hundreds of permits they had already approved in the months prior. So what that means is that even though they wouldn't sign any new permits, they're continuing to ship all of the weapons from the permits they had approved before. They were deeply misleading about this. They were hoping that no one would figure this out. But this is not what we demanded, right? This is not what millions of people across the country demanded, was just to not sign any new permits. We're demanding an end to the flow of all weapons to and from Israel. So we've gotten them to concede this one point, and we have seen that they are susceptible to our pressure around this. And as Canada is obviously one of Israel's biggest allies in the world, so if we could force one G7 country to stop approving new permits, we know we can force them to also cancel all existing permits and to also stop buying those weapons from Israel. So that's a little bit of sort of where this campaign is at so far. I'll leave it at there for now, because I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone else. But I just want to reiterate the one point that this is very winnable, this campaign. As Dalia mentioned, this is not something that requires new laws to be written. This is something Melanie Joly can do today and should have done months ago. She took just that one baby step by not approving new permits. She can do the rest, and we can make her do the rest. And not only is this winnable, it is deeply impactful. The carnage that Israel is carrying out would literally not be possible without the weapons sales and purchases by countries like Canada, the US, and European countries. It would literally not be possible for them to continue their genocidal assault. So anything we can do to cut off the flow of weapons is vital. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you for highlighting really the deep-rooted relationship that Canada and Israel have with one another, and the ways in which, government officials try their best to confuse and distract from what's really taking place, and the extent to which the arms trade actually goes. And I think it is also really important to highlight the piece of weaponry being bought from Israel. And we know often that weaponry is used here, against Indigenous communities, marginalized communities, and folks who are already in precarious situations. And so I think the harm being caused, we also see in our various locales. And so with that, I will introduce our next speaker. Yipeng Gi is a Chinese-Canadian first-generation immigrant. He is an Ottawa-based doctor who worked recently on assignment in Rafah as part of a health team. He just returned to Canada a few days ago after attempting to enter Gaza again, but was stuck in Egypt, unable to cross over. I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me and for creating this time and space to think about this really important work and really necessary goal of a two-way arms embargo. I want to share some reflections that just kind of came to me over the past hour thinking about this. And I want to acknowledge that I'm calling in from traditional unceded, unsurrendered, stolen Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. I'm actually calling in from the House of Commons, like Parliament Hill. It's a committee room, hence why I don't have a great setup. I'm just holding my phone up to speak. But I've been here throughout the day today because it's the third reading of the pharmacare bill to increase access to prescription medicines, primarily diabetes medications and contraceptives. And one of the biggest arguments people have around access to medications, and I have patients that struggle with access to medications, one of the biggest arguments is that it costs a lot for Canada to pay and bulk purchase medication, which is also not true. It's actually cheaper to do that. When Canada is funding a literal ongoing genocide in Gaza with weapons manufacturing that is delivered to Gaza, delivered to Israel, to the perpetrators of this ongoing genocide, and delivered to other complicit enablers of this ongoing genocide, like the US, and then funding said genocide. While today is also the 5th anniversary of the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and recognizing the history and the legacy and the ongoing genocide of Indigenous peoples here in Canada. These issues are so intertwined and interlinked, and it's so necessary to be able to draw these parallels. And I just wanted to kind of share some of those reflections before, I want to recenter and refocus on Gaza, as we should always remember to do in all of our work here, to do meaningful solidarity work, really from the belly of the beast, with what is enabling, aiding and abetting in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. I really struggle with the words to describe what is happening on the ground in Gaza here and now today, because each day brings new massacres. Each day brings new challenges for people who are displaced. Just this week, I had a colleague who was the ambulance driver for our team back in February tell me that he's been displaced yet again with literally no place to live, literally no place to live. People have been displaced upwards of 6-7 times internally. These are people who have already displaced into the Gaza Strip. If we look at why the Gaza Strip exists in the first place, in the way that it exists. And with the continued onslaught of bombing and the continuous devastation that affects the healthcare system, the targeted attacks on hospitals and clinics, there's no other kind of like way to understand this than this being an ongoing genocide. And I think everyone here understands that, but I hope to paint a picture as to how significant, how incredibly bad and terrible this current situation is. I was able to enter Gaza back in February because there was somewhat of a humanitarian corridor through the Rafah border. I describe it to people as kind of like a slow stream of water of humanitarian aid that was entering. What the Gaza Strip needs is that dam to basically be fully broken, and a flood or tsunami of aid to really enter. That's what they really need. But what they had before in February and the months preceding early May was just a stream. And then May 6th happened, where the Israeli forces took over the Rafah border, occupied it, still occupied, and closed. And then there was just nothing for about a week and a half. And then trickles of humanitarian aid workers were able to exit and enter through the Kerem Abu Salem crossing in southeastern Rafah. And how I describe that is droplets, literal droplets. Like you've closed your tap and there's, you probably need to fix your tap because there's like 1 or 2 droplets coming down every couple of seconds. That is the situation with what's happening now. It's still like this, while the situation continues to worsen with an ongoing ground invasion in Rafah, to the point where there are no functioning hospitals in Rafah anymore. We said there were no functioning hospitals when the Kuwaiti hospital closed because that was the only hospital with emergency capabilities. And then we saw the Emirati maternity hospital close, which is the only maternity hospital in the south, where people that I know, team members, including foreign international workers, were working, including midwives, OBs. This is a non-functional hospital now. So there's no way for people to get really healthcare in any meaningful sense in the south. And what we see consistently when things like hospitals and clinics are attacked, these are also places where people shelter closely, because people think that these are safer locations when we know that there are no safe locations in Gaza. It leads to people leaving, including the doctors and the nurses, which leads to further issues with keeping these hospitals and clinics operational. And so everyone is now really just moving north. Rafah was, before October, was somewhere in the 250,000 kind of people range in terms of a population. Back in February, it was somewhere in the range of 1.2 million. Over the past month, because of the Rafah ground invasion, over 800,000 people have left, are moving north again, moving to the middle area, but to a place where the Israeli forces say is a quote unquote safe area, which is Al-Mawasi, which is sand, which is the beach, which there are no meaningful resources, any way to kind of live meaningfully when you need to set up a tent, if you have access to tent resources, and to set it up on the beach, on the sand. And what is even more horrific is that the bombs fell from the sky to the very areas that people were once again told to evacuate to, causing further massacres. I'll just wrap up by sharing that I was heartbroken to know that the primary care clinic that I worked at back in February, called the Tel Sultan Primary Care Clinic, just last week, or I think a week and a half ago now, it was turned into a morgue. The clinic is non-functional, but there's no other places to store dead bodies, killed dead bodies from these massacres. So they're storing them in a non-operational primary care clinic. And yet, they persist and choose life and find ways to create joy and happiness for the children through flying kites, through sharing the limited amounts of food that they have. But we have to do so much more because we continue to fail them. We continue to fail them. The other really significant development also happened in the past week or week and a half is UNRWA, the main United Nations Relief and Works Agency that primarily delivers the majority of aid in the Gaza Strip, including in Rafah, closed all their operations in Rafah, partly probably because many people are leaving it, but the cited reason was the hostilities, the Israeli forces hostilities. It's unsafe for them to stay, and so they are also leaving and have stopped all their operations in Rafah. Once again, this is the safe area that in October and November, the Israeli forces told the entire population in northern Gaza to move to. And now they're being forcibly displaced, ethnically cleansed yet again, moved around. To what end? I will leave it there. And once again, thank you for taking your time to think about how our government is so heavily complicit in not only the material supports of arms trade, but also the rhetoric, the anti-Palestinian rhetoric that facilitates and enables the decision-making that we all need to challenge. But it's through this kind of work that we're able to collectively demand better and stand for justice and humanity and support Palestinian liberation and self-determination from Turtle Island to Palestine, and recognize the interconnected issues that we also need to reckon with here in Canada as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you for, grounding us in what the conditions currently look like. And highlighting the calculated ways in which this genocide has been carried out, but also, the undeniable or unignorable fact that one of Israel's goals right now is to make the Gaza Strip so uninhabitable that the area is ethnically cleansed of people who were previously displaced in 1948, or a large portion of the population of the Gaza Strip who's, displaced in 1948. And we are talking about 76 years of ongoing ethnic cleansing and genocide. And I know I've seen some folks in the chat ask questions around the question of why is the demand not around sanctions. And I think one of the things to think about is this as a stepping stone to then ask for further accountability and ending of that complicity. I think, thus far we're highlighting complicity with arms, but it goes beyond that. And I think also when we're talking about Gaza, we know that, for the last 17 years, Israel has been imposing a blockade on the Gaza Strip. And the current iteration of it that's taking place with the genocide is one that is far more severe. And I appreciate the way in which you described it in terms of the tap of water. But that tap of water, as you're saying, has always been controlled or has been controlled for the last 17 years. And what does that mean for the people who are asking for a life of dignity? And so I think that kind of sets us up nicely to go to our next speaker, who's going to kind of highlight the demand of an arms embargo as it relates to the broader Palestine movement and the movement for Palestinian liberation. And our next speaker is Shatha Mahmoud, an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement. And I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Dalia. Hi, everyone. My name is Shatha, and I am an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement. I'm super happy to be here, and that I am very happy that PYM is backing this campaign. The Palestinian Youth Movement is a transnational grassroots independent movement of Palestinian and Arab youth fighting for the liberation of our homelands from Zionism and imperialism. And I'm here talking to you today as an organizer, but also as a Palestinian who has both sides of her family in Gaza. For the past 8 months, I've had dozens of family members murdered with the financial and material backing of this government. The Palestinian Youth Movement has been mobilizing for the past 8 months on all fronts, and we've been pushing for our demands, which are an immediate and permanent ceasefire, an end to the genocide, an end to the 17-year-long brutal siege on Gaza, the release of all Palestinian political prisoners, an end to the 76-year occupation of Palestine, and that Canada imposes an immediate 2-way arms embargo on the genocidal state of Israel, a state that for the past 240 days has massacred more than 40,000 Palestinians and has made the entirety of the Gaza Strip completely unlivable. Our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joly, use the language of human rights and pretend to regret the violence that is unfolding in Gaza, while they continue to participate in the weapons sales and manufacturing of arms and technology that is currently being used in what is considered the most documented genocide of our lifetime. Rafah, a so-called humanitarian safe zone, where the majority of my family members are currently displaced in, a small place that is densely packed with 1.4 million forcibly displaced people and makeshift tents, is burning. The magnitude of the bombing and the resulting fires in Rafah couldn't be put out with the few emergency resources in Gaza. There is no water. There is no proper civil defense equipment. Palestinians were attempting to put out the burning bodies of their families and their loved ones with sand. Men, women, and children were burnt alive in their tents. Palestinian parents are forced to uphold or to hold up whatever is left of the little bodies of their lifeless babies as they demand that the rest of the world put an end to this ravaging genocide. Nowhere in the Gaza Strip is safe. Israel is holding more than 2 million Palestinians hostage in an open-air prison and bombarding the entire territory. And Canadian taxpayers are funding the military technology and weapons that are committing these atrocities. Canada has given Israel the necessary material, ideological, and military support needed to wage this genocide. Between 2018 to 2022, the so-called state of Canada imported over $130 million in arms, from Israel, and in the same time period raised over 1.2 billion tax-free dollars through Canadian charities for the genocidal state. When we have a deep healthcare crisis, where patients are being treated in stretchers in hospital hallways, a deteriorating educational system, where only the wealthy can afford post-secondary education, a devastating house crisis, and people are unable to, and we are unable to provide clean drinking water to First People communities, something is very wrong. The arms embargo campaign is integral to not only ending the genocide in Gaza, but for the broader struggle for Palestinian liberation and liberation for all. Israel is one of the world's most militarized and securitized countries in the world, with its colonial regime a very highly profitable enterprise. Israel tests its weapons and security technologies on Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, a captive population in the case of Gaza, a population held hostage, and then goes to military conventions and advertises the war crimes it commits using this technology as proof of its capabilities. It presents them as battle-proven to the international market. Its colonial occupation of Palestine is essentially a laboratory for its murderous arms industry, an arms industry that Canada is materially and financially backing. Israel exports this technology, bringing the politics and methodology of its occupation to assist other repressive regimes. Any state buying military and security products from Israel are complicit in the genocide in Gaza, the upholding of the Israeli colonial regime, and the domination and brutalization of the global South. As we witness the horrors that continue to unfold in Gaza, we must all refuse to remain complicit in this genocide. We know that the power of the people and the tools of political organization will allow us to achieve victory. An arms embargo is the first step and a crucial step towards ending this genocide and towards the total liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. Thank you.
You, Shatha. Yeah, and I appreciate you highlighting the ways in which, Israel uses Palestine as essentially a laboratory for all these weapons that countries like Canada buy. And, essentially the relationship that Israel has to Palestinians is that of test rats in a laboratory, and then it's often advertised as battle tested, and that is tested on our people and our bodies, and it is a way in which they repeatedly make profits so then they can continue their varying genocidal campaigns. And I think, you highlighted some really important parts that have to do with the working class and folks' labor, and I think this kind of workers themselves want jobs that are not helping and feeding into war machines that are killing other poor folks overseas. And with that, I think we often say that Palestine is a labor issue, and it's particularly for those reasons, is that people want jobs where they're not being, they have access to jobs where it's not necessarily a weapons company or a company that's producing parts of weapons. And so with that, I'll introduce our next speaker. Greer is a senior policy analyst in federal public service and was recently elected to the National Executive Committee of the Canadian Association of Professional Employees, or CAP, the third largest federal public service union. She is also on the coordinating committee of CAP for Palestine, a Labor for Palestine union caucus of rank and file CAP members organizing in the federal public service space for Palestine solidarity and liberation. Over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today and to share in this critical call for an immediate and full arms embargo with these incredible folks. My name is Greer, and I'm joining as a white settler on the unceded and unsurrendered traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. So I'll start off by saying, by echoing that exact point, Palestine is a union issue. It is a worker issue, and it is an issue right now and will continue to be one for our lifetime. The most obvious reason as to why is the international solidarity that has been a pillar of the trade union movement from the beginning. All workers are connected, and our labor is shared across borders, across industries, and across communities. Our labor, the work of our bodies and of our minds and of our souls, is innately human at its core. What connects us is not just that we have bosses, but that we recognize this humanity and uphold it through unrelenting principles of justice, equality, and safety. And so when one worker is under attack, whether it be next door or in another country, whether it be in a workplace by an employer or in a community by a government, it is in fact an attack on all of us. And this is why CAPE, along with several other national, provincial, and municipal unions and labor councils, have signed on to this demand for an immediate two-way arms embargo. The attack on our Palestinian siblings is one that we all feel very deeply. But even beyond that, and especially as we think of doing any international solidarity work with and for Palestine from where we are, we know and we are living settler colonialism. We are well aware of its violence and the range of direct and indirect ways it operates to destroy and dismantle Indigenous communities at every turn. It is our duty then to resist when we see this occurring elsewhere. It is our obligation to identify and to resist these systems of oppression. Particularly as workers, we understand how settler colonialism relies on the participation of labor to meet the need of expansion and occupation. So as workers in Canada, when we hear the call from Palestinian workers, when we receive that call from our comrades through Palestinian trade unions, we are obligated to fight back together. There's no other option. This campaign for full arms embargo is a key part of this. So as was said, I'm a federal public servant, which means that my employer is the government of Canada, and that is a very unique position to be in. It means that my boss is the one continuing the flow of arms and components and technologies in some way to Israel. And that means that we as employees are technically helping to do that. So it's not just workers that contribute to the making of these weapons and weapon parts, but there are workers that are also contributing to the materials used to facilitate specifically the government's continued buying and selling of these weapons and parts. And these workers are unionized federal public servants, and we feel complicit now in genocide because of the choices of our employer, which we as a union and as union members find unacceptable. So two things are happening. One is that the labor of some of our members is being forced by the employer to go towards the research, analysis, and preparation of documents used in the decision-making process regarding, for example, weapons manufacturing contracts that are in no way reflective of a full arms embargo. And I want to be clear here that our members are not making those decisions. We provide information and make recommendations that senior management, who answers to higher and political levels of government, either take or leave as they make the decisions about support for Israel. And we all know what they're choosing. The second thing that's happening is that the labor of other members is being used to continue government services, operations, policy work, translation, etc., thus allowing business to run as usual while this happens. If we seriously have learned from workers isolating and making untenable the apartheid South African government, or even the fascist governments of Italy in the 1940s and Chile in the 70s and 80s, we know that business as usual is not an option. So I just want to say a couple of things, to sort of take these bigger ideas and put them into a bit of like an on-the-ground union context. So the first thing is, if you have 3 people, you have a group. And if this group meets semi-regularly, you are going to get something done and you are going to make change. If you're here today, I know that you want to make a difference, and I believe that you can. So create a group of like-minded folks in your union and start putting pressure on your leadership to uphold members' rights, whether it is freedom of speech or a workplace free of anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia, and build your way to resolutions and boycott, divestment, sanctions in the way that you know how. Getting your union to join this arms embargo call is a great first step. The second thing I want to say is do what you can from where you are at. So whether you are a barista or a bus driver or a business entrepreneur, there is something specific about your positioning that can be leveraged for action. So identify what it is that is special about where you are, and the path for action will become much more clear. I know we've heard it before, thinking global, acting local, but it will give you and this movement diversity of targets, diversity of tactics that will keep this fight going. It's not over yet. And the third thing I want to say quickly is get clear on the kind of power you already have, what kind of power you want to get, and who you can invite to join you. We can't do this alone. We need to collaborate. We need to work on this together from many different angles. It's the only way. And I just want to say to all of the public servants who have joined us today, do not be afraid. You do have the right to stand up and say no to this genocide. You have the right to engage in solidarity with the Palestinian people. As public servants, we are constantly told to be neutral, but there is nothing neutral about this. We serve Canadians. We do not serve the Zionist project. And if you're an analyst, you know it has to be evidence-based. And let me tell you, the evidence is clear. The Canadian government is supporting this genocide, and they are doing everything they can to make it seem like they're not. Our employer is using our labor to avoid an arms embargo, but we decide where our labor goes, and we decide that we will not be complicit in this genocide. We as workers have that power. So I'll end there and pass it along, but a free Palestine always and in all ways. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for also kind of highlighting workers' rights and the ability for people to mobilize and speak up, and kind of the ways in which people can get together with other members in their workplace and organize around this. Yeah, I think, it's always important to remember that ultimately Palestine is a workers issue, and that whether it's settler colonialism here or settler colonialism in Palestine, workers ultimately have a really large role to play, and they are, these settler colonial projects don't serve workers in any way, shape, or form. Thank you. And so maybe we can kind of go to our next speaker, who is Noor. Noor is a Palestinian Filipino grad student at the University of Alberta, where she co-founded their Students for Justice in Palestine chapter last November. She was also an organizer for the recent encampment at the University of Alberta, which was violently broken up by the Edmonton Police Service on May 11th. Noor, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Noor. Thank you for having me here. I'm talking to you today from Treaty 6 territory, where the University of Alberta sits on stolen land. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about my experience on campus as a Palestinian student and as a community organizer. So we erected an encampment at the U of A on the morning of May 9th, and it was violently dismantled the morning of May 11th. The Edmonton Police Services entered Main Quad, where we were situated, at around 4:30 a.m. while almost everyone was sleeping. There were actually a couple of people still sleeping when the police advanced and started beating people with batons. And so unfortunately, they woke up to the sounds of people screaming. They spent a few hours slowly chasing us off of campus property and then down the road. And by 8 a.m., the group was completely dispersed and made the decision to leave campus and check on the people that were arrested or injured. There was a diverse mix of Indigenous people, Jewish people, Palestinian people, white people, queer people, disabled people. The list goes on. It is absolutely shameful to know that the president of the university employed police violence on a group of really vulnerable and mostly racialized people. And the aftermath of its violence, of its violent ending, was largely a focus on condemning the Edmonton Police Services and the University of Alberta for employing police on us, for hurting their own students and for lying about it. And they still claim that it was a peaceful removal. The president, Bill Flanagan, has yet to apologize for his actions. But the students who participate in these encampments are doing so to bring the public's attention to what is happening in Gaza and in Greater Palestine. Palestinians in Palestine are experiencing harm that most of us will never experience. So it's a huge disappointment, actually, to see people's allyship being focused mainly on the wrong thing, especially since the focus on students' freedom of expression is really just code for let the students say whatever they want so we can continue to ignore them. So we don't want the focus on us as students. We appreciate people's solidarity and allyship to us, but primarily allyship should be with Palestine and not with us students. What we hear from most of the students, staff, and community members who visited us at the camp is that it was incredibly joyous, inspiring, and peaceful. And while I'll affirm that those statements were true for our camp, I find it to be a little bit bothersome. Something I'd like people to challenge themselves with is the community support, whether from student peers, faculty, staff, or other community members, is that support conditional on us protesting peacefully, quote unquote peacefully? And I put quotations around peacefully because peace is not a word that I like. I think that it's subjective. It's become somewhat of a trigger word for me in the last year because white folks get to define what is peaceful. We know that it doesn't take much for white people to feel unsafe, even when they're not unsafe. Students have lit candles for martyrs, and it's been framed as a violent act. It's been framed as celebrating terrorism, and that's what's happened last November at U of A. So how peaceful do we really need to be for people to say that we are peaceful? I don't think there's any way for Zionist institutions to perceive Palestinians as peaceful. That goes against their fundamental beliefs. So is it even productive at this point to use the word peaceful? Why is it that occupying buildings, breaking windows, or painting statues red is seen as violent, but it's not the statues themselves that commemorate colonizers, genociders of this land that we call violent? When oppressed people resist in any form, it will be condemned as terrorism. So peaceful isn't a word that we can rely on. That's why we prefer the word justice. Is the act of resistance justified? Is it the marginalized group's right to resist? In our case, yes. All of the escalations we've been seeing on campuses are absolutely justified. And so if you're someone who's in this space as more of a supporter to the student organizers, I just challenge you to reflect on what it means to protest and escalate in a justified way, and what your conditions are for continuing to extend that support. Because escalation at this point is absolutely necessary. It is clear that this genocide is not stopping with just peaceful weekly marches. We're in the 9th month of this now. Enough is enough. If you're a faculty member, there's lots of things you can do to support students. You can write emails or letters to your colleagues. You should urge them to express their support for the student movement. Have people sign open letters, meet with the leadership in your faculty or your department and ask them how they are supporting Palestinian students, staff, or protesters on campus. Create coalitions between yourselves so that the next time students need support, they know where to find it, and make your support known to them. And your resources known to students. So don't wait for them to reach out to you. Be proactive and think of how you can make things easier for them. And we've seen incredible organization of faculty in support of their students across the country and here at U of A. The University of Alberta, like many institutions, has a responsibility to put ethics first in all decisions, including financial ones. And students, faculty, and staff have the power in their hands, in our own hands. These universities will be boycotted if they do not divest from genocide. They cannot go on without us. We are the university. We won't be silenced, and we won't stop until Palestine is free. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Appreciate your contributions and you sharing those thoughts, and sorry to hear about kind of the role that the police had in the violent way in which they dispersed the encampment. I think kind of going back to the different ways in which Canada is complicit with the Zionist state. One of the ways is also, the deadly exchange of policing tactics, and policing between brackets, but, the ways in which they suppress different types of protests, and the ways in which those tactics are experimented with on Palestinians and then exported. And I think just to highlight very quickly, the role of the student movement. We're talking about different fronts here, whether that's labor or grassroots organizations or global organizations or the student movement, everybody fighting for a collective goal of having justice for Palestinians and having a liberated Palestine. And I think, the pieces of asking for disclosure and divestment from university administrations is really important, given that, again, having support, financial and material support to different companies that then prop up and support genocide are ways in which we can weaken the settler colonial state of Israel. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ahmed Nabil, who is a student at the University of Waterloo and part of the encampment there. Ahmed is on the negotiating team with the administration and has been involved in student organizing since the start of the genocide. Over to you, Ahmed.
Hi, everyone. So, as Dalia just mentioned, I'm Ahmed. I'm a student at the University of Waterloo, and I'm part of the Occupy Waterloo student encampment. Actually, the encampment is doing a screening of this webinar as we're talking, so hi to everyone there. Students have been organizing to end their university's complicity for months, steadfast in their demands and unwavering in their solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. And students have really taken inspiration from Palestinians who have been steadfast, not only through this genocide, but for decades. We look to the students in Gaza who have been undergoing a scholasticide, where every single university in Gaza has been destroyed, where academics, professors, teachers, and students are targeted in a deliberate attempt to shut down Palestinian education, where hundreds of schools and libraries are bombed and obliterated. Students and journalists in Gaza have made a call for students to join the student intifada, and so at the University of Waterloo, we answered the call. Today is day 22 of our encampment, demanding that our university end its complicity. The University of Waterloo, like most other universities in so-called Canada, is complicit in this genocide. Our institution invests its money, our tuition, into weapons manufacturers that supply the bombs and warplanes used to target children. One of the companies that UW is involved in is Lockheed Martin, the manufacturer of the Hellfire missiles that have been dropped on schools and hospitals. The complicity of the University of Waterloo extends beyond its investments. UW has partnerships with Zionist universities that are entrenched in the Israeli military. Our university has a strategic partnership agreement with Technion, a university in so-called Israel. Technion is the technological spearhead of the Israeli occupation forces. Researchers at Technion developed weapons for the Israeli military and have been developing them for decades. This includes the outfitting the Caterpillar D9 bulldozer with military technology. And this Technion developed bulldozer is remote controlled and has been used to demolish Palestinian homes for years and is actively being used in this genocide. Technion also developed a weapon called the Scream, which is used to oppress Palestinians and deafen them whenever they protest. Technion has deep and long-standing ties with Israeli weapons manufacturers like Elbit Systems and Rafael, which have been mentioned earlier in this webinar. Technion is the institution training the researchers and developers that work at these companies, and it regularly hosts a 3-month course titled Defense Strategy for International Markets, where this course designed for executives and researchers focuses on branding Israeli weapons to international markets. And as was mentioned here earlier, to market those weapons as battlefield tested, they try them out on Palestinians. What's more is that members of Technion are directly involved in the genocide. 3,000 Technion students are currently deployed in Gaza. The majority of the senior administration of Technion are current or former members of the Israeli occupation forces. It's an institution run by the Israeli military for the Israeli military. And UW has deep partnerships with Technion. So the students at the University of Waterloo demand that our university immediately sever all ties with Technion and establish an immediate boycott of all Israeli academic and cultural institutions. We demand that this university disclose all its investments and divest from any institution that is complicit in this genocide. These demands go hand in hand with establishing an arms embargo on so-called Israel, because these partnerships are part of the things that are supporting the arms that are used for this genocide. Students at Waterloo have been here for 22 days, and we will not stop. We will not rest till these demands are met and the complicity of our university ends. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed, and appreciate you highlighting also the relationship with specific companies and, academic institutions that are also part of this war machine and the ability to commit these heinous acts. I think, a lot of the different, or like a thread that I'm seeing in what different speakers are saying is also about the ways in which the complicity that Canada has with Israel is pervasive in a lot of different ways, whether that's universities, whether that's through unions, whether that's, the federal government itself, but looking at that as it also relates to the weapons that are being sent. And so, and I'll introduce our next speaker, Najwa Shaifa, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name, is a 23-year-old activist and organizer with the group Oakville Halton for Palestine, based in Oakville, Ontario. As a group administrator, she has been instrumental in leading OH for Peace pressure campaigns at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels to end Canada's complicity in the oppression and genocide of the Palestinian people. Over to you, Najwa.
Thank you, Dalia. Good evening, everyone. My name is Najwa, and I am one of the organizers with Oakville Halton for Palestine, an activist group that encompasses Burlington, Oakville, Halton Hills, and Milton. We know that Canada has a shared history with the Zionist state of settler colonialism and genocide of its Indigenous population. The communities OH4P operates from are located on the sacred lands of Treaties 14 and 22 and the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, I will be primarily discussing our activism in Milton, Ontario, with MP Adam Van Koeverden, who was one of the first Liberal MPs to sign on for a bilateral arms embargo with the Zionist state and so-called Canada. I will also provide general guidance on advocating for Palestine with federal MPs. I'm going to begin by providing some background context on how Oakville Halton for Palestine came to be and the work that we do. OH4P was formed in January 2024. We are a grassroots organization that includes committees such as political engagement, education, logistics, events, etc., that all work towards an end to the ongoing genocide and for the benefit of Palestinian people, both in the diaspora as well as their ancestral homeland. Our group was formed when the mayor of Oakville, Ontario, and the town councillors refused to hear a ceasefire motion, and the presentations of over 30+ delegates that signed up to speak regarding the violence ongoing in Gaza were dismissed. These delegates included a doctor who had recently returned from operating on children in Gaza, as well as an Indigenous community member who attended to show solidarity. Rather than listening to constituents, the town council broke for recess and never returned, so we delivered our presentations to one another and began our first organizers' meeting. We held our first in-person meeting with Milton organizers and MP Van Koeverden in February. When we originally reached out to MP Van Koeverden, we did not receive a response. And once the addressees on the emails were limited and a zip code was provided in the body of the email that was in the MP's writing, our attempts to schedule a meeting were much more successful. And we have learned through our advocacy that any correspondence with an MP should have a zip code delineated that is within their writing. Otherwise, it's much easier for them to dismiss you. On March 6th, members of our community met with MP Van Koeverden, and expressed disappointment in the Liberal government's inaction on the bloodshed and the refusal to condemn the ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people. MP Van Koeverden, like many Liberal MPs, had noted in private meetings that he felt very sorry for the Palestinian people. He expressed empathy, but I think it's important for anyone who is engaging on the political level to not just take these empty words at face value and to continue to push for concrete action and steps whenever you're having interactions, whether it's with the MP themselves or with the MP's staffers in their offices. On March 6th, we did mention the NDP Opposition Day motion, which was going to be voted on March 18th. And MP Van Koeverden noted in private meetings that he did not fully agree with all aspects of the motion. However, he refused to specify which aspects he disagreed with. As the meeting was ahead of the March 18th Opposition Day motion, we launched a telephone call campaign through Action Network that was provided by the Palestine Solidarity Team, where they could enter their postal codes and speak based on a script, urging MP Vancouverden to vote yes on the motion. And we additionally participated in a paper pledge campaign, which was extremely successful. Approximately 850 signatures were gathered, and individuals all attested that they would not vote for the Liberal Party unless MP Vancouverden agreed to vote yes on the motion. And this included the call for a bilateral arms embargo. We were able to gather pledges by performing community outreach through flyers, postering, and setting up pledge stations at community hubs, such as restaurants and religious institutions in Milton. MP Vancouverden subsequently agreed to vote yes before the motion was watered down and amended. We have seen Liberal MPs across the country allude to the fact that only non-lethal weapons components, or military technology are being exported, and MP Vancouverden is no exception. As Shatha alluded to, we know these are all being used on Palestinian civilians, so that military technology can be marketed as battle-tested at arms shows and be utilized for profit in the military-industrial complex. You will often hear when you meet with your MP that they have to take the government's position. However, due to our consistent pressure, we have seen many Liberal MPs across the country take a stance that is against the grain and is against the fray of what the Liberal government is largely voting for. So it's important to keep consistent pressure and to be relentless with your advocacy work. What has been ineffective is relying on MP Vancouverden or any politician to amplify our voices or our demands. Again, these people will meet with your community members and say vague platitudes, but if you let up your community pressure, you will not see any results. And we have been consistently sending all of our MPs emails at least once every month, checking in on our demands and ensuring that they hear from the community and that they see us and see what we are seeing, which is our pain, and that we are moving that pain towards action and that we want to see results. We want to see an end to Canada's complicity in the genocide. However, while you're giving your MP criticism, you're giving them your demands, it's important to also add in some positive reinforcement. And whenever MP Vancouverden published a statement that was supportive of the cause or attested that he would vote yes to the Opposition Day motion early on, he did attest in this recent campaign that he will support a bilateral arms embargo with Israel. We post on Instagram messages thanking him for his support. We send him an email thanking him for listening to us. So it's important to also add in some positive reinforcements while you're also keeping these politicians accountable. And politicians, as well as their staffers, can tend to get intimidated if many people are copied on an email or if you attempt to arrange a meeting with 10 community members. So it's important to keep these kind of communications to a limited number of individuals. And this can also help your messaging stay more consistent. And in our meetings with MP Adam Vancouverden, we found that it was easier for him to divert the conversation or avoid accountability for concrete actions that we were trying to push for if there were many people in the room that he could bounce off of. So if you do choose to engage in a group meeting, ensure that each individual is on the same page and can deliver that concise and clear messaging. Thank you.
Thank you, Najwa. And it's great to hear kind of the tactics that y'all employed to put pressure on your MP to have, to represent the demands that you hold. And I think, while dealing with politicians, it can be frustrating and annoying because, like you said, they will say things and then do different things and you have to keep the pressure up. I think, there's a need at times to engage with them, particularly when we're pushing for an arms embargo, given that it is something that would need to happen from the government itself to put it into place. And so with that, I will pass it over to Emma Jackson, who is on the national coordinating team for the Palestine Solidarity Network, a network of over 40 riding level teams that are building power to end Canada's complicity in Israeli apartheid. Palestine Solidarity Network is one of the initiating groups behind the Arms Embargo Now campaign. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Dalia, and thank you, Najwa, so much. For speaking to the work that's been happening at the riding level specifically. I think it's just so important and inspiring to actually see the ways that building power can force the hand of MPs It's not about sort of appealing to their hearts and minds. From the very, very beginning of the Palestine Solidarity Network, we have never said, we're hoping to, force these MPs to find their moral compass in some way. It has been about building power at the grassroots level, about organizing our neighbors, about pulling people in to take action in order to force their hand to really change that balance of power at the local level and force them to do the right thing, not because we think that, their hearts are telling them to do that, but because ultimately what they care about is power and re-election. And that is really at the core of the theory of change and what the Palestine Solidarity Network specifically has been working on. So I'm going to talk for the kind of final 10 minutes that we have here about how all of us can specifically take action in order to win this demand for a two-way arms embargo. I think Rachel and Dalia have made it very, very clear, and it's been inspiring for me from the very beginning, months ago, to know that concretely, this is a demand that we can win. This is something that can have a tangible result on the ground that can ensure that Israel is no longer, fueling its genocidal attacks in Gaza, and that Canada is not complicit in the death of Palestinians on the ground. And there's a role for every single one of us to play in making that a reality. So really quickly, I want to bring us back again to this sort of March NDP motion that happened March 18th, March 19th, because I think it's a really important sort of anchor point in our own analysis and at how we're going to win this demand. So we know that in the lead up to that motion that was tabled by Heather McPherson, that there were liberal backbench MPs who were planning to vote in favor of that motion. There were dozens of them. We got confirmation in emails. We got, private sources from media who had said, that the Liberal Party at the very last minute was really scrambling. What happened was that we had built enough power at the local level. We had been holding our MPs' feet to the fire such that they knew, I have to support this motion or I'm going to lose my seat. That was the work of people like Najwa, teams all across the country that had gotten us to that point. The Liberal Party, Melanie Joly, the cabinet, watered down that motion in order to avoid those divisions being publicly exposed. They knew that that was a risk to have, dozens of Liberal backbench MPs breaking with the party line and saying, no, I cannot support the way that we are propping up Israel's genocide in Gaza. And so what happened in watering down that motion is that it obfuscated those divisions, right? And so we were left with that really being hidden from view. The vast majority of Liberal MPs then voted in favor. We got language that was very strong initially on ending the flow of arms to and from Israel to then be watered down to kind of taking action in order to impose a one-way arms embargo. So what this campaign has really been about from the very beginning, and the reason why we believe it's so strategic to narrow in on this focus for a two-way, a full and immediate arms embargo on Israel, is because it allows us to really bring those divisions back to light. And that's already been happening all across the country. We have close to 20 Liberal MPs now that have signed on because of the work of their constituents that have been building power, that have been flooding their inboxes, that have been calling them, every hour of the day. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to walk you through our website so that you know exactly kind of where to take action. And then from there, I'm going to talk briefly about how we plan to take collective action moving forward. So this is the Arms Embargo Now homepage. Many of you will already be familiar with it, but I want to show you a few things. So some people have been asking, which MPs have signed on? I'm not sure if my MP has signed on. You have to click on these kind of particular things in order to get this drop-down list that will then tell you. So I think every single NDP MP -1 have now signed on to the call for a full and immediate arms embargo. Here's the list of Liberal MPs that have signed on. I believe there's a few more that we think are coming in and are expecting in the coming days that will be added to this. And again, Green Party MPs, both Green Party MPs that are in the House of Commons have now signed on. In addition to that, because of our work, the Bloc has also issued a letter saying that they support a two-way arms embargo, but that they kind of individually as MPs will not be signing on. But the most important thing that I kind of want to take some time to walk through is this tab at the top, which is how you can take action. I think for those of you that are kind of in a riding that has a riding level team, plugging into that work is incredibly important because those neighbors, they're already organized, they already have a structure, they have the infrastructure to be able to support you in doing this work. But if that's not the case, do not let that hold you back. There are so many tools that are already available here that many of these groups have been making and have been sharing back that we've been posting in order for you to be able to, again, as Greer said, gather 3 friends, go, poster, get together and email your MP together, call your MP. So just to give you an example of some of this, so poster in your neighborhood, there are postcard templates that you can use that are here. There are shareable graphics if you have social media accounts yet. There are scripts in order for you to access. So here's a call script, both if you're calling after hours and you're going to leave a voicemail message, there's a script for that. If you're calling, getting together friends and kind of phone banking, there's also a script for that. So many tools and resources at your disposal. I'm going to make calls at the very end. I'm hoping all of us can, but before I get to that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, so we know that the House of Commons could be rising as early as this week. It's likely that that will be extended. So June 7th is the final day that we know for sure that the House of Commons is seated. But the Arms Embargo Now campaign is now calling for a more escalated sort of day of action in order to drive home the demand for all MPs to sign on to the letter for a two-way arms embargo. So on June 13th, which is a Thursday, I believe, yes. On Thursday, June 13th, we're calling for people all across the country to take action outside of their MP offices. These actions could look different. They could be pickets, they could be rallies, they could be yourself and maybe 3 other people postering your entire MP's office with Arms Embargo Now posters. We're drawing attention to the fact that the MPs that have not yet signed on to this letter have had ample opportunity. And so it's time to bring that demand to the doorstep and to shame those who have not yet signed on. And so imagine, we'll provide a toolkit, which will be coming in the next day or so. And then the hope is that, you can bring giant versions of this MP sign-on letter to the doorstep of your MP and ask them to sign on, being able to sort of publicly shame them out in front to say they have not yet done the very bare minimum demand. This is the bare minimum that Canada needs to be doing, is to stop the flow of arms to and from Israel. And so that's something that anyone can take part in. And if you're part of a riding level group, or if you're already sort of involved in local organizing and feel confident that you can take on one of these actions, we ask you to do so. You can email us at info@armsembargonow.ca. I think Rachel will drop that in the chat. And we'll do the work of pushing this out across all of the socials of these initiating organizations. We'll make sure that we're promoting it to the close to 10,000 people that have signed on to the petition calling for an arms embargo. So finally, my hope is that in the kind of final 3 minutes that we have, that we can make some phone calls to our MPs. And what I'll do is I am going to share my screen just so folks can kind of see for yourselves how easy this is, because it really is so simple. Once I can do this. Okay. So if you haven't yet called your MP, I'm pretty confident that most people kind of on this call likely have by now, but you can click on this kind of link that we've put in here to find their phone number. I have the very unfortunate reality of having a Liberal cabinet minister as my MP, one who shamefully does not respond to his emails, who's incredibly avoidant. Yeah, he really, really sucks. And so if you're from Edmonton, please call Randy Boissonneau as much as possible every single day. And okay, we're gonna make a very quick phone call. And I want, yeah, people can just witness this and then. Oh, I should put them on speaker.
Un message en français suivra. Thank you for calling Honorable Randy Boissonneau's office, the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Center. Sorry couldn't pick up your call. Please leave us a brief voicemail with your phone number. Our email is at randy.boissonneau@prl.gc.ca. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. In the meantime, have a great day. Merci d'appeler le bureau de l'honorable Randy Boissonneau, membre du Parlement d'Edmonton Centre. Désolé de ne pas avoir pris votre appel. S'il vous plaît, laissez-nous un message avec votre numéro de téléphone ou envoyez-nous un courriel à randy.boissonneau@commercial.gc.ca. On retournera votre message le plus tôt que possible. Sur ce, passez une bonne journée. Please leave your message after the tone. After leaving a message, you can hang up or press pound for more options.
Hi, Randy. My name is Emma Jackson. I'm a constituent of yours that is living in Edmonton Center near 116th Street. For 7 months, we've been calling on the Canadian government to take decisive action to stop Israel's assault on Gaza. Instead, the government has continued military exports to Israel and continued to fund this massacre by buying millions in Israeli weapons. I'm calling on you as my MP to sign on to the Arms Embargo Now statement at armsembargonow.ca. I was hopeful in March that Canada would finally fulfill its obligations under international and domestic law by declaring a two-way arms embargo. Instead, the government has only committed to suspending approval of new weapons permits to Israel, and it is not even clear that it has done that. The refusal to cancel existing permits to Israel and the continued purchasing of weapons from Israel shows that Canada is not serious about ending Israel's atrocities against Palestinian people in Gaza. I am also disturbed by the continued lack of transparency about the quantities of Canadian-made weapons and components that are shipped to the United States, untracked and unreported, and ultimately end up in Israel. I'm calling on you as I watch Israel escalate its violence in Rafah and across Gaza. The UN and countless humanitarian organizations have warned that this invasion will be catastrophic, and it is already proving to be catastrophic. But Israel, having no real consequences for their gross violations of international law, is pushing ahead. Canada has once again failed the Palestinian people by not enacting any sanctions or a two-way arms embargo. I urge you to join organizations and unions representing millions of Canadians and show us that you are listening to residents of your riding by signing on to the Arms Embargo Now statement at armsembargonow.ca. It has been 8 months. It is long overdue for you to take action and end Canada's complicity in this genocide. Okay. So for those that are able to stay on, I think we would love to make calls to use this as an opportunity to flood our MPs' inboxes. I'm going to stop sharing, but Rachel, if you can drop the link for those of us who are able. I think for myself personally, I need the collective accountability. I find it incredibly helpful to have people watch us take phone calls, to be in community together in doing this. So before you take off, please call your MP, bring this demand to their attention.
So in case folks are unclear, we're literally all getting our phones out now and we're all calling our MPs together before we wrap up the webinar. So take out your phones. We're doing it.
I see some folks on their phones still. I hope my voice is not making it way into your voice message to your MP, your voicemail. But I just wanted to thank everybody for gathering together tonight and for continuing your commitment to ending Canadian complicity in this genocide. I also want to thank all of our speakers who kind of highlighted the different ways in which Canada has been complicit in the arms trade, why this is the demand that we're pushing for, and the ways in which we can really pressure the government to make this demand a reality. Yeah, I just want to thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing an arms embargo become a reality and seeing no more weapons going to or from Canada to Israel, and no parts of weapons also going to the U.S. And inshallah ala khair, the genocide will end soon, and we will be doing our part to kind of make sure that the country that we reside in is not being complicit in the killing of our families overseas. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for taking the time tonight, and I hope you all have a good evening. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.